wonderfully is the palette. It's called Stamp and Stick. Right now, putting this black glue on, just like paint. Now this glue is probably the most incredible product I have ever had the pleasure of working with. That's how simple, and see, it's shiny and when it's wet. And then for the use of right today, embossing powder, and only with the use of embossing powder do we not have to preheat this product. If you're using the accent powders or metal leafing, you must heat set this glue in order for it to become tacky and accept the medium that you're using. I'm going to put the glue right into the embossing powder, and it adhered very nicely. At the same time, I'd like to show you that there is a small area right here that has a little bit of an extra cling or magnetic cling. I'm going to remove it with a dry brush before I heat set it. Also, just to let you know that if you're going to be using the combination of embossing powder and, in this area, let's say, was intended for the use of ink dyes, let's go ahead and do the powder first. Clean up where you think you can. You don't want to be too aggressive in this area because you could lift it and take it right off the line. There's another little spot right there. You can also tap it one more time. See, now that is nice. Over the embossing powder. And watch it as it then starts to turn like an enamel finish. And what's really nice about this, the heavy cloisonne embossing powder gives you this very high textured surface. The cleanup right here, I noticed, I'm going to need to wait just a few, 30 seconds, let's say, with the side of the X-Acto knife. You have to wait for it to cool just enough so you really don't disrupt what you just did. And you see how it's starting to clean up those little tiny particles that went below the line. And there you have that, nice and clean. Let's go to a very quick next step. And we're going to now paint all of the outside of that pattern. Give you a very quick visual as to what we can do with the powders around here. We have to heat set until this shiny glue dries to a matte, dull finish. That makes it sticky and perfect surface to accept the dry mica powders, accent powders, or Pearl-Ex powders. They're all the same. They're just given a different name, but they all are the same. Now see how nice and rich that black has covered. What I'm going to do with the use of these powders, right here we're going to use Aztec Gold, Red Russet, and the Bronze. I'm going to take just a little bit because it's the magnetic cling to the brush is pretty strong, and all I want to do is add these different colors right next to each other and alternate as you grab another color. And you see, look at how absolutely rich this is grabbing to that powder. Alrighty. Now, what's nice is, see, I've got excess powders here. I'm not going to clean it or try to blow it off until all of the glue is covered. Otherwise, you may be blowing that powder into areas that you had not wanted to do. And let's do a little bit of bronze right here on the rest of that black. We can come back to this area and continue down in here with the rest of the color. What I'm going to do now, though, is I tapped off the excess powder, and with a dry tissue, I'm going to take that tissue and just rub that powder. Well, what's going to be very nice after this is a drop of satin polyurethane varnish with a sponge, and over the powder and over the already fixed embossing powder, I'm just going to enhance it with one coat right now of the satin varnish, which then completely sets it really nice. And that way, no matter what you do from here on, you have no worry about interrupting that color. The next thing I'm going to do is work on this inside area. And what I think I'd like to do is attempt in this area to do the black powder, embossing powder again, like I did up in here. With the paintbrush, try to stay within the inside of the line now. The wet glue. Well, at the same time, if you forget and you heat set this glue and do what we just did a second ago with the dry powders, it's not going to interfere whatsoever with the embossing powders to adhere. It still has perfect amount of grab power that's going to allow the embossing powder to stick to that surface. So again, we're going to take now a little spoon and take it right directly over the whole glue that I just added on, tap it, and that's a pretty nice effect. If there's any surrounding black somewhere that you don't want to be, then be sure to use your dry brush, and like maybe right in here, there's tiny little amount in the way. Let's move the powder out of the way, go back, and now heat set this area. Melt the powder from the piece that you're working with without your hand in the way. I have a very interesting second part to this shard. What we did, that's pretty nice, isn't it? Well, but what we did up in here is that we put accent powder with the glue. So now I'm going to show you a different look that I'm going to add all of the powder further down and overlap in that just that little bit of area, and I think I want to feather it. Finish gluing all of this area, and then wherever you join in from where you left off, just kind of feather with the brush so you don't have like a perfect straight line to show where you picked up again. Here's a little something different we're going to do, is taking the powder in your fingers, just like maybe as an example using salt in your food, and you're going to very carefully but evenly distribute this powder. And you know, it's going to be hard for you to see because it's black, but let's just tap it off. And again, we have a very light showing of granules on that glue. Let's go ahead and heat set. Actually, we're going to continue cooking the enamel, the powder to the enamel finish, such as like right here. And then, after that, we're going to go over it again with the dry powders and show you how very, very cool that technique is. And you can see it. See how it's very, very light, and there's plenty of black glue that has not been exposed to a medium yet, which, by the way, while I'm talking, I am also trying to explain to you the next step, but giving the necessary few minutes that it takes to dry and carefully touch and make sure that this is sort of cooled off enough so you can now add the powder like we just did a few minutes ago. Now we're going to go over that part right here, and look at the difference. Look at how dramatic that is, and I just love this technique. Okay, again, let's just put it on, and whatever little extra needs to come off, we'll worry about that after all the glue has been touched with the powder. Now this really adds a greater dimension and a more dramatic showing. I like to use, with the black, these three colors that I mentioned, because you want to keep it simple and just allow those colors to pop out but be subtle at the same time. Here I want to make sure I take a wet wipe and wipe that right off, because I don't want that part to get varnished over. And at the same time, the powder has gone into the crevices, which is really a beautiful look as well, into the powder, the dried powder, embossing powder here, but we don't want that to happen in this technique. I'm going to go back to the use of the polyurethane varnish and go over the powders and set it. So now what just happened, you see the black that came back? A minute ago it looked like it was overwhelmed with all that powder over the black embossing powder. But what it did actually was removed what little bit of powder went over the embossing powder, and it just adhered to the black glue that did not have embossing powder on it a minute ago. Isn't that pretty? But see the dramatic difference in the two surfaces and how you achieve that.